Ladies and gentlemen, if we can go ahead and get in our seats, please. Want to start off, I'm Robbie Schwartz. I'm the Director of Planning and Development for the City of Loganville. I want to thank you for taking an active part in what we're trying to do here today. What we're trying to do is we're trying to fine-tune our zoning code to plan for a better future for Loganville. In doing that, we have our wonderful consultants here from TPUDC. They'll be here tonight. This is kind of the kickoff for this whole process. This is kind of more of an informational session. At the end of this month, we'll be releasing more information later this week, but at the end of this month is the Code Palooza, and that's the one where the citizens will have more of a direct say in some of the different areas that we'll be covering. So, but that information will be coming out a little bit later. I also did want to take this opportunity to let anybody know, and anybody might be interested, we do have openings on the Planning Commission. We'll be accepting applications through the end of February. And if you have any questions, just give us a call up here at City Hall or come see me after the meeting. But at this time, I will invite Brian from TPUDC.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming out tonight. I know you all have other things you could be doing, and so we appreciate you giving us a little bit of your time. So we're going to do tonight is I'm going to run through a presentation and hopefully spark some questions and thoughts and ideas for you all. And then I'm just going to stop talking and just do a Q&A and just have a chat together. Typically what I always say is I'll stay in here as long as y'all still have questions to ask. And what that means though is that sometimes that may be longer than you intended to stay here. And so if you have to get up and leave, we promise not to talk about you after you're out the door. It's okay. I'm sure y'all probably want dinner at some point. So I'm Brian. I'm Brian Wright. I'm the principal of Town Planning and Urban Design Collaborative, and I get the privilege of getting to lead these kind of meetings, but I'm just part of a team. So I've got me in the back, Anna Blevins. She's y'all's project manager, and she's the real boss, and I just like to get to hold the microphone. So she's got lots of answers, or will, as we move into this process. And then we also have Brian Hudson, who's part of our team as well. And so we did a little tour around today. Robbie gave us a tour of the town, and it was great to see the things that we've been hearing about. We have talked to some of the elected and appointed officials and just kind of picked their brains, since hopefully, usually what we find in most cities is they're the ones who, kind of have their finger on the pulse of things and at least hear from their constituents what's going on. And so we like to start with them, and we talked to different department heads, and just to give us a little bit of flavor of what to expect when we came tonight. But as Robbie said, this is really the beginning for us. We've been doing some homework, we've been studying a little bit, but you haven't missed anything because this is it. So I'll run through the presentation. So we came here from Franklin, Tennessee. We were able to chip our way out of the ice and in order to make our way down the highway. And it's great. If you've not been to Franklin, that's what it looks like, our little main street there. And but we also get to work all over the country. So we have clients, we work on zoning codes, obviously, like this, and we do comprehensive plans for cities and towns of all sizes and all places. And it's nice because it gives us an opportunity to see kind of, what's going on in other places, so that we can see what's working for other people, what's not working, and we can share those thoughts and ideas with, the communities we're working in. But as you'll see throughout this process, it's really important to us to not just sort of import ideas that are, don't make sense in the community we're working in. Like we did the ordinance over in Monroe, and it's a different place, right? Even though it's nearby. And so we understand that, which is, part of our process is getting into that. So just so you'll know, we're not experimenting on you. Here's a few of the different zoning projects we've worked on around the country. And it's a little bit different, and I'll explain to you how it's different. The other thing that I find is when we start a project like this and we're saying, hey, we're going to be, updating your zoning ordinance and doing things, and, a lot of people show up in the room and it's the first time they've ever thought about zoning, or they've thought about it, but it's not been in a happy way because there was some problem that the zoning caused them, or something was happening near them. They didn't like the zoning and all that. And so sometimes people come out of concern, and then we go, hey, we're going to be opening up the zoning ordinance. We're going to be assessing it and analyzing it and looking at it from cover to cover. And we find that participants feel like they need to all of a sudden become experts in zoning, right? And so I found this picture one day, and I love it because you can't see the faces of the pilots, and the plane's at this odd angle that if you were a passenger, you think, I might not be comfortable at that angle, right? And so I'm not sure if things are going well on this flight or not. If we could see their faces, we'd probably know. Are they like, or are they like, yeah, And so when you get on an airplane, though, there are a few things you need to know, right? You need to know where you're trying to go, right? Hopefully your ticket has that. You need to know what time your flight is as well, so you don't miss it. You need to know what seat you're sitting in, unless you're on Southwest. And then you need to know where's the bathroom. But other than that, when they say you can check the little pocket in the seat in front of you for the information card, it's not the instruction manual for the airplane for you to have to learn how to fly it in order to ride on it, right? You're counting on the pilots to get you where you're hoping to go safely. And so my encouragement always is that, our goal is we don't want you to feel the pressure to become the pilot or the coding expert in this case. And so as we go through this, there may be some things that you're really passionate about just individually. Dig into those all you want. You may go I've always wanted to become an expert in zoning. Feel free, do that. But I just want to say to you right now that you don't have to if you don't want to. So don't feel like if you don't dig in some sort of a scholastic way that you won't be able to participate, okay? So for us, we start at the beginning. We work, we say building on a firm foundation. So we look at your past work. So we've looked at your comprehensive plan. We looked at your current zoning ordinance. For instance, comprehensive plan. If you don't know what a comprehensive plan, I'll tell you what it is because I'm referring to it, right? So a comprehensive plan is the long-range policy document for the city. It establishes the vision, sort of the direction you're heading in. It's got policy guidance for growth and development. And it also has specific action items that sort of direct the city to do certain things. So as you evaluate opportunities or decisions that have to be made in the future, typically you look at the comprehensive plan first and you go, well, what does it say about that? And then for instance, if somebody's coming in for a rezoning or something and you go, okay, well, what is our future land use on that property? It may be different than what the zoning is currently. And so you go okay, well, the comprehensive plan supports this. This makes sense. They did a traffic study, shows they're not going to clog up the roads anymore. And so we can vote in favor of it or whatever. That's just one example of how you could use a comprehensive plan. So you've got these goals in there that are great, and if you haven't spent any time looking at your comprehensive plan, I encourage you to do so. It's detailed, but as you think of it as the high level, the sort of the dream, the vision, right, and then below that is the zoning. Not in importance below it, but sort of downstream from it. And the zoning are the rules and the regulations that allow or make that vision a reality. Okay, and so we're at that stage. And so we're taking your comprehensive plan as a given. And so we've been looking at what does it say that y'all want to do. And some of the things that are in there, we'll talk about again. So if you participated in the comprehensive plan process when you guys did it, you go we already answered those kind of questions. Well, that may be true, but some people weren't here when y'all did that. And also sometimes new ideas come up, as time passes. So you got your vision statement in there. I'm not going to read it all to you. So we're going to talk about zoning now, because that's what the point of this project is. So again, forgive me if you already are zoning experts. But a lot of times people hear about zoning and it's just sort of like a concept, and it doesn't, mean much. But zoning, the city uses zoning to sort of to group typically different uses into different areas called zones, right? And so it has the rules and regulations about what you can and can't do in each of those zones. Each zone is represented by a color on the map typically. But the zoning doesn't actually cause something to be built. It doesn't make somebody have to do something. So for instance, as we go through this process and update the zoning ordinance here, if there's a change that's made to something that's, how it is today, that's not to say that somebody, now that it's adopted, they have to go do that. It just means they can go do the thing, right? And so through this process, we kind of walk through, well, if we're going to make a change, what would we like it to be in a way that's sort of beneficial for the city and hopefully for the landowner too? Because a lot of times what we'll see is people say, I don't want to see anything happen. I don't want to see new growth, or I love that farm over there. That farm should be agricultural forever. And the farmer says, did you ask me about that? Because that's my kid's inheritance. And we all like to look at it when we drive into town. So we have visual squatter's rights on that farm. But the farmer was counting on that for sort of, generational wealth or whatever in their family. Now, not to say that every farm needs to be developed, of course, and there are different ways that if you want to protect and preserve farmland, you can do that, and you sort of incorporate that into the process. But just giving that as an example. So zoning can give you a place like this. This is a place you might go, visit on a little weekend getaway, and just, check out the little shops and eat at a cafe or whatever. But zoning can also give you this. And I would wager to say that nobody did a process like this and people said, we want that as a result of when they said, what do you want the future to be? But it just happened, right? They sort of sat down, they wrote some rules and regulations, they were going to separate this from that. These things kind of go together. And so they get grouped over there, and kind of how it turns out and what it feels like and looks like and is neither here nor there normally in a zoning ordinance, right? Now, it's kind of fun to look at this picture and you can kind of guess a date, because I don't think we have Circuit City anymore. There's lots of things that probably have gone the way of the dodo in this. And I'm not sure what traffic engineer they use, but that looks like a roller coaster, right? We never get high marks on this image. Nobody says, we want that. Yes, just like that. When we ask people what they want, most often they say, I want to live in a place like Mayberry. And you go, okay, well, what does that even mean exactly? Small town charm. And we've actually heard that as we've been talking here in town. And it's awesome when we hear that, but it's actually really hard. If somebody said, we want a dense urban center, it's much easier to zone that than small town charm. Because small town charm can mean a lot of things to a lot of people, and it's a bit organic and a bit messy. And so when I was hearing people over the years say, I want Mayberry, I was like, well, what does this even look like? And so this is actually an aerial photograph of the back lot in Hollywood, or wherever it was they shot the Andy Griffith show. And what you notice is that this is actually just like a little small southern town. They kind of copied it, and it's all fake, and Floyd's barbershop and all the different things that were going on there, and people loved it, and it's only on 40 acres. That's a pretty awesome little town there. Now, most places we work, the typical zoning ordinance gives you something about like this, and it's fine, right? I mean, every house is about the same, the lots are all the same, and I'm sure they're nice houses, and they probably got nice granite countertops and who knows what, all the things, high-speed internet or whatever. But there probably used to be a historic barn and a farmhouse there before this image popped up, right? And so we lost that farm and that charm from the farm and the barn, and we got not a neighborhood, but a subdivision, right? And so that's one of the ways that I think about, sort of development today is different, where it's not about as much about creating community as it is a commodity, right? And so we have the opportunity today to build and develop property in a way that we didn't in the past. The machinery we have and the speed at which we can do it and the scale at which we can do it is different now. And so development starts to make people feel a bit anxious a lot of times when you see a rezoning sign pop up or what a bulldozer or whatever show up or a hearing is going to happen. It makes people anxious because so often you're asked to trade something that you love, or even just kind of, it was okay, it was the woods or whatever, for something that is just like maybe every other town you have all around you, right? And so like today, and I say this just as an outside observer, Anna said, "Oh, we're in Loganville now." And we said, "How did you know?" She said, "Well, there was a sign that said Loganville." And I was like, "Oh, okay, great." And there are certain areas where you go where you're like, oh, okay, this is different, this is unique. But a lot of the towns and cities around here are kind of the same, and you drive from one into the next, and it's because of their zoning, right? So what do we do if we want to have something different than that? One of the things that zoning loves to do is separate things, because there was a time at which we started being able to do things that could have a real negative impact on ourselves and our neighbors, and we didn't realize it, and we started putting factories next to kindergartens and houses, and they just dumped their stuff in the creek, and the creek was where you happen to get your water and all that stuff, and now people are dying, and so they're like, that doesn't work, let's separate things, right? And so you start separating it, and so that made sense, a certain idea. But now these pods are popping up, right? And so here we've got a commercial pod or shopping pod. Here's an office pod. You have these office parks that pop up all around. Here we have a residential, and it says in parentheses, single family pod, because we also have residential multifamily pods. And I always get a kick out of this because when you can just kind of glance at it and it pops up on the screen, it could just as well have been some sort of a train wreck, like the box cars are all scattered around the tracks and, something happened there. And one of the things that we probably hear the most in all the places we work around the country is we don't want any multifamily. We don't want any multifamily. And then I always talk about, well, tell me about that. What does that mean to you? And when we get down to it, the biggest objection, and there's always a litany of things, but when you kind of boil it down, the multifamily development that happens around the country today they're some of the biggest buildings that go in. They're the same. They're surrounded by these giant seas of parking, and they just have a real negative impact on kind of the character of the community. And, people say, oh, well, renters, and they don't take care of stuff. Blah, blah, blah. And so I'll do this test. So show of hands here. How many people have never lived in an apartment before? So 2, right? There's always at least 1, sometimes 2. And so then we go, okay, well, what was that like? What were you like? And so because the other thing we hear about in communities, they say we don't want apartments, and then they say we have a housing problem, we have an affordability issue, we have a housing shortage, this is all across the country, and it's very rare that places can just say, oh well, that's okay, we won't have any more multifamily, because then they say, my kid just graduated from college, and I say just, but now, actually it's been like 12 months. No, it's a year and a half, and they've been living with me. And because they don't have a job yet, they can't find one, the job market's hard, and there's nowhere for them to afford to live in and around our community. And so they're back in their old bedroom, and the kid's like, yeah, I am. And then you're ungrateful, But it's time after time after time I hear this same story. And so then they say, what can we do to give my kid a place to live until they can, get a real job? Or they say when they get a real job and they realize that the big city they moved off to isn't so great, and our town was pretty good, there's a place that they can live and you know, as a single person, a young person, or as a young family or whatever. And so looking at different housing options becomes part of the discussion nearly always. Y'all may be different here, but then there's the school pod, and my joke here is you know, we had the train wreck before. This is the insecticide factory, you know, and they got all these fences around them and barbed wire and stuff, and thank goodness they do, I guess, these days. But on the other hand, it doesn't add a lot of character to the community. And so this sort of little cartoon here sums it up, the difference between how we used to create towns and cities and how we do now. So the now is on the bottom. So you got your collector road down there, and then on the right, and I would use my laser beam, but it is absorbed by the TV screen apparently. So you got your work pod over there, and you got your shopping pod in the middle, and the school pods over there, and then housing kind of spaghettis through it. And what you'll notice is that none of those connect to each other. And in fact, for a long, long time, zoning ordinances prohibited you from connecting. And so what that means is every single time you get in your car, or you want to go get something, you have to get in your car and go get on that collector road. The maybe second place thing that I hear, maybe first, but depending on where we are, after no multifamily, is the traffic here is terrible. And then I look at the development pattern and I go, well, it's no wonder. It's not because so many people have moved here or live here. That has something to do with it, obviously. But it's the fact that the development mostly occurred, like the historic areas in most cities in town, every city in town, all the streets connected. Like the idea of like, I don't want people cutting through my neighborhood. Can you imagine in a historic neighborhood? Nobody says that because all the streets connect. It's just people go through one way or the other. If there's an accident over here or there's a road work being done, you just go a different way, no problem. But today, for the longest time, we've been separating all these things. And even like when you go down the highway, it's like you can't go from McDonald's to the hairdresser to the what, each of those you got to get in your car, and you can't even walk between them because there's some like drainage ditch and some fence and whatever. On the top part of the image there is how we used to build places, and all of the different uses were sort of intermingled amongst each other to a greater or lesser degree. All the roads connected to each other in the way that I just described. So there's a multitude of ways to get around as a pedestrian, as a cyclist, as a vehicularist, automobiler. And so, communities tended to used to be walkable and compact. They would actually preserve the farmland by being a bit more compact where they decided to develop. They would have a mix of uses, so you could have your daily needs met within walking distance of your house. That's hard these days because we spread out so far and everybody's got so many cars, but some places can still do it. And then a diversity of housing types and for different income levels, different housing preferences. And because one of the things that's interesting about that multifamily discussion is for the longest time, and this depends on how old you are really, is it was like your dream was to have a single family house that you owned and all that. And then sort of you had the recession, you had COVID, you had all these things happen. That's changed. Like you have people who are rich who wouldn't dream of owning a house. They want to rent because they want to be able to be mobile, to move, to go here, to go there. It's all about the experiences. It's all about, I want to travel and I don't want to have to deal with the yard, and it's all, all of these things. And so we have this whole group of people who rent by choice. And then you also have people who don't want to drive. They don't, like young people, a lot of places they're like, it's so uncool to have a car to drive. They're getting their driver's license like begrudgingly at like 25 or something, And that certainly, that wasn't my experience when I was 16. I was like, right there, I want my license, let's go, So, so anyway, preferences and things have changed over time. And so how do we deal with that? While also recognizing that not everyone's preferences have changed. Like there are people who are here, and so we're not just trying to like create a place for people who aren't here or for everybody's kids or whatever. It's like, how do we make a place that's still going to work for all the people that live here? So, so some of the things we've heard so far when we asked, what do you like the most about Loganville? parks and outdoor. We heard the family friendliness is great. The location, sort of geographically, you can get here and there if you're not stuck in traffic. And then the small population. And so, that's sort of like, okay, well, if we're, how do we balance that, right? We go, if we stay small, that'd be great. But in most places that we work, they don't have endless resources financially. And so at a minimum, they have to grow in order to keep up with the increased cost of services over time, or else raise their taxes, which I've not been to many places where people vote for that. So some places they do, but not most places. What are some of the challenges facing Loganville? We've heard about the high density development, traffic, infrastructure, housing affordability, and then abundance of chain businesses. So, and just for what it's worth, when we sort of pried about that a little bit more, we said, what do you mean? Like, well, it's fine to go to Chili's, but wouldn't it be nice if there was some really unique places? We see some of these other towns have like really local mom and pop and all that stuff. And so, that's something that you can think about when you're doing a zoning ordinance. So for instance, if you know that the chains have a certain requirement for exactly how big their footprint has to be, exactly this, all that, the zoning ordinance can sort of be adjusted in order to start to curtail that. I'll give you an extreme example. We were working where was it? In Vermont, and very different place, really cool, some of the stuff they're doing there, but this community, they didn't have a Target in the whole state of Vermont, and every city was like, good riddance, don't think about putting it here. And so they're like, don't allow footprints of buildings to be bigger than this number of square feet, because that's how big Target wants. And Target's like, we'll squeeze in, and then they wanted to encourage people to walk. And so they had us in the zoning ordinance prohibit drive-throughs. And so you could have a walk-through, but you couldn't have a drive-through. Most places that we work, they say, well, that's a little bit too far, but drive-throughs are a bit of a nuisance and they're a bit ugly and all that stuff. So like, what can you do about it if you want it to feel more walkable? And so we have the drive-throughs in the rear, on the side, or there's some things you can do, right? But I'm just telling you, some people go all the way, and it's fun. And one place did that, did away with drive-throughs, and then they had a different consultant working on that, and then they called us up and said, can you help us fix our ordinance? We've made a mistake. The property values on our strip highway have plummeted, so we helped them out. So what should the zoning ordinance update accomplish, we ask people? Guide growth intentionally. This is something that we're hearing more and more and more, as people are saying, we're sick of the builders and developers planning and designing our city, right? One subdivision at a time. Now, that said, there are some places we work where there are developments that when somebody comes to visit them from out of town, they take them to see. They're like, this is the coolest new neighborhood, look at this. And we're gonna go, grab some coffee in their little neighborhood center and do all these things. And so, it's not always the case, but people are saying, we're sick of this. Like, how can you help us? And I said, well, you have to decide where you want to go, and you have to say, we are going to go there no matter what. And you try it and you see what happens. And if, it doesn't go well, then you call back and you say, can you help us with our drive-through situation? We overestimated ourselves. Not that I'm suggesting that y'all need to do. I'm just going back to the other example. So protect that small town charm, establish a clear community vision, strengthen the downtown, manage housing diversity, and improve walkability and connectivity. Some of these things are interesting because I was like, wow, these are sort of advanced planning concepts. And so, people we've talked to have been doing their homework. They've been looking and they've been reading and researching and looking at these things. So it's kind of neat to see. And as we go through this process together, we'll dig into some of these things. What do they mean specifically? And then y'all can decide, yes, we agree with some of those things that you heard. So updating the ordinance, what we will do, so we'll clean up issues with the existing ordinance, right? So every place we go, there's always contradictions in the ordinance, and there's like duplications, and it's just a mess, because normally what happens is, at some point in 1963 or whatever, we got our first zoning ordinance, and then this thing happened, and these neighbors were having a dispute, and like, well, we'll solve that, and then they do a little text amendment to the zoning ordinance to solve the problem. We were at a place one time, and they said you can't have chickens on lots that are less than 1.27 acres. Man, that's very specific. They said, well, those people came in, and that person had the chickens on the lot, and theirs was 1.28, and so we, fixed it so they couldn't do that again. And I'm just like, golly, we'll see like overly complicated uses, as in, I always say, we'll see like a B1 and a B2 zone. And a B1, these are bakery 1, bakery 2. And a B1, you can have donut shops, and a B2, you can have bagel shops. It's like, they're kind of similar. I know it's hard to see the hole in a bagel, but it's there if you squint, so anyway, so there's usually overly complicated and messy, and so we go through and fix all that stuff up, and then we, through this process, you guys are going to tell us, like, what are the places that you love the most? What's awesome already? And so we go, okay, great. So there, we're going to protect those places. We're going to write regulations that, because a lot of times places are great in spite of the regulations, right? They just haven't been messed up yet by a regulation, or nobody did anything there or whatever. And so we'll make sure that things are kind of shored up. And then there always are places where people say, oh, it's such an eyesore over there. And that's our gateway, and we come in and it's nothing but, tire shops and whatever, and I don't know what. And so they said, what can we do? And I said, well, you know what to do. We know how to help you. So we can write regulations and help fix that stuff as well. And then, in nearly every place we go, what we find is that fear and that anxiety that I was talking about with development, it's not even because you're sure that something bad is going to come out the other end through a development process. You just don't know what's going to come out, right? And so creating predictable outcomes for the community, so you don't have to come to every meeting and protest things. You go like, oh, well, I don't know if y'all do that here or not, but some places do. And so, you go like, oh, well, the zoning ordinance, we participate in the process, we understand how this works, it's got us covered. I'm going to go play bunco tonight, and instead of going to the city hall, and so, but also the development community, right? Developers, like half of our clients are developers, right? So we work for cities and towns, but we also work for developers, and developers, they're just like, if they would just tell us exactly what they want, I would do it. But the rules and regulations are kind of wishy-washy, and there's all those weird things and the contradictions and the whatever, or there's like loopholes and open-ended things, and they're like, well, so I'm going to try this or that. Just tell me what you want, and it's going to save me money, and because it saves me time. And I don't have to be the villain every time I want to go to work, because that's when they're coming in here, they're going to work, And so giving them certainty as well, giving staff and the elected officials and, everybody certainty is huge. So creating something for everyone and everything in the right place, right? So when you have those use-based zones, like the only criteria you're looking at is, does this use make sense next to that use? That's pretty crude. That's that's pretty high level. It's not a very sophisticated way to look at things. And so there are ways that we can help with that. Balancing different modes of transportation. Right now, sort of post World War II, anything that was built here was, you're going to drive. That was just like, of course you're going to drive. The whole town is built around driving. Well, and then you go like, oh, we really should have a sidewalk over here or there, maybe. And you go like, well, that sidewalk goes to nowhere. I'm like, who walks there? Why do we need a sidewalk there? No one walks there. And you go like, well, that's maybe when you get a sidewalk, maybe they will walk. But it's hard to think about that, because you put a sidewalk right next to a highway and cars are whizzing by your shins, and all the buildings that are over here, you're passing these giant parking lots and strip malls, and you go like, you see somebody walking, they may be on a sidewalk, but you're like, just pull over, like, do you need some help? Like, surely no one would walk here on purpose, And so, how do we make places through zoning that actually make it where you might feel safe or, desire to walk or bike? And then there's an economic viability component. So we see zoning and planning as an economic tool. So if so many places call us today and they say like, hey, we're kind of slipping. We were like the it place 20 years ago, and now all these other places are doing these cool things, and everybody wants to move their business there or go there, whatever. And they're going to hang out over there, and they're spending their tax dollars, and they're just coming back here. And now we got to provide services, and we don't even get their money and all that stuff. And so there's an economics component to this as well. And then having something that's easy to use and administer is, if you ever spend time talking to your staff, that's something that I'm sure they long for. So let's see. Oh, I'll turn my clicker off here. There we go. So our process is to really try to understand the essence of this place. What's the DNA of the community? And the only way that we can do that, one, is by talking to you all, and we kind of sort of hear about it in a secondhand way. But then we actually go out and measure things. We actually go like, these places you said you love the most, what are the setbacks? What are the lot widths? What are the heights? You may not know this, but it doesn't always reflect what the zoning ordinance says. The zoning may say that the setback should be this and lot widths are that. And in fact, if the most beloved part of many, many towns and cities burned down, they couldn't build it back the way it was because the zoning doesn't sync up with it. It was just generically written. So we go through and do what we call synoptic surveys, and we get all these different data points so we can understand it and you say, well, why is the setback this in this new zoning district? And we say, oh, well, because these places we looked at had this sort of range. And we tend to not see things like a setback or a height as this number, right? Because that's not the way real places are. Most places, except for the most urban places, the buildings don't all just line up like soldiers in a straight line. There's a little bit of back and forth and in and out. And so we have a range. We'll say the setback may be between 10 and 30 feet or whatever in one zone, and another zone may be between this and that. And they usually overlap though, because again, except for on a zoning map, there's no hard lines in the real world. You don't step from B1 into B2, except for on the map. So then we look at all of your zoning districts that you have, and this is, some of you may think, oh, that looks fascinating. Other people glazing over, but it's a bit technical. We look at all your zoning districts and the different characteristics of them, and we start looking for like these zoning districts that you have that are so similar. Like why not combine them in a way that makes sense, and a way that doesn't have a negative impact. And sometimes it makes sense to leave them separate. But I mean, we're working for the city of Charleston, and they had like, I don't know what it was, something crazy, like 48 zoning districts, and we took it down to like 20 or something. It was just like wild. And everybody's like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Why do we have those districts again? Remember the chicken thing? Oh yeah, that's right. So now, I've mentioned uses a few times, and I've not talked about uses as in a favorable light as a way to do zoning. But uses are still important. And so there will be a use table in the ordinance, and so we've just taken use from like the first most important thing to like the sixth most important thing, right? But it's still there. It still makes sense in certain times. And in some areas where, we're not looking to protect or preserve something that you love, or to transform something that needs work or whatever, then it may all just stay the same districts, by the way. So, it's not about just sort of throwing the baby out with the bathwater and starting over whole cloth on the ordinance, because there's some things that make sense. And one of the things that we've learned is people really freak out when you start messing with the zoning district that their house is in. Even if we say it's not going to change, it just has a new name or a new color, they're like, I don't believe you. It's just, And so, you know, the established neighborhoods, it's so rare that people say, we really need to transform my neighborhood. You know, we do have people, though, that say, like, I see these other neighborhoods in the historic areas that have a coffee shop or a corner store or a little cafe, and we don't have that. Could we have that in our subdivision that was built in 1982? And we're like, well, yeah, you can. You know, it's an unusual request, but some people like kind of get that. They say, like, let's do something like that, but we're not going to propose that. So if anybody's interested in that kind of stuff, y'all can ask us about it. But it's, you know, we've just learned there's certain things you just don't want to freak people out about unnecessarily. So what we you know, the approach that we take is to really start to focus on the idea of character. And so what is the character of a place? How do you experience it? What does it feel like when you're there? Does this feel urban? Does this feel rural? Does this feel suburban? Is this, you know, all of these different sort of place types have a feeling that you could explain to somebody. And then if you really start to think about it, they have numbers that go along, like the things I was talking about, those synoptic surveys that we do. They have metrics that you would start to be able to code. And I can create a place that is truly rural with a character-based approach. I can create a place that is very urban with a character-based approach. And I can create a place that is suburban. I can create a place that's a bunch of big boxes and Walmarts and all that with a character-based approach. That place has its own character. It's not one that people have their heart flutter about typically, but they sure like to go shop there, you know? And so every place has a character. So when I say that, a lot of times people start thinking like, or there's a sort of a term that people often use too called form-based coding. You may have heard about that. And we've realized that talking about form-based coding is a bit abstract, and people think like, oh, you're saying I'm going to fill out these forms? What does this mean? And it's like, no, it's like the form of the place. And so character is something that tends to resonate more with people. And so it's often used, though, as sort of shorthand for these sort of charming little quaint walkable neighborhoods or mixed use, you know, all that stuff. And it does a great job at creating those places, but it can just as well create the places that you say, oh, we need to fix that place, you know. And so just as you're going through this process with us, just understand that there's no intended outcome until we talk to you all and you all tell us what you intend the outcome to be. So there's conventional version of character base, and part of character base is just graphical. It's easier to use, it's easier to understand, to read. You can see images and there's tables and things, as opposed to, we saw a community that all of its uses, like 100 uses, were in paragraph form, separated by commas. So it's like, in this zone, you can have veterinary offices, comma, you know, vape shops, comma, you know, blah, blah, blah. And it goes on and on and on. And you go like, what in the world? Could you not have done bullet points at least, you know? And so some of what we're going to do is just make it where it's easier to use. And so this would be a character-based approach for like a historic neighborhood, right? And so the same metrics, same kind of, you know, the numbers will be different, but the way that we think about it and the things that we're measuring are kind of in the same table format. This is an interesting place. This is a strip mall that wanted to transform, and it's sort of outdated and all that stuff. And they had this big parking lot out front, and they said, can we redevelop in the parking lot and start to make it kind of feel like a little main street and have little street, you know, street trees, and the shops come up to the street and, you know, on-street parking or whatever. And so we actually created a zoning district that allowed for the strip mall to stay and function as it did, you know, because it was still making money, and then allowed for them to start infilling in that parking lot. And this was a unique thing we did for that community. But ultimately, you know, we want it to be clear and compelling. And so when we're all done, you've not just participated in this process and you've told us what you want, but you're actually going to be comfortable, hopefully picking it up and looking at it and evaluating if a development comes through. You're like, oh, that's great. That's meeting up with all that stuff we talked about during the process and all that. So this is I just want to show you all a couple of examples, because We heard that infill was something that y'all were interested in. This was a community we were working in, and they had this, their, like Main Street was just at the top left corner there, and that's the back of a building in an alley, and there was this like one little historic house that was set back with the two peaks there, and then a parking lot in front of it, and everybody's like, oh, that's a spot you could do something neat, and we need some more housing, and we'd like to have little cottages and tiny houses or whatever, and so we created this, and so each of those is a single-family house, a tiny house, with a little pocket park in the middle, and sidewalks and street trees and stuff, and so you kind of went from bleak to charming. This is a neat one. This is a place called Mashpee Commons. This was an old strip mall, and it was, I don't know what year this picture was taken, but that's what it looked like. And somebody bought it, and they're like, they're up in near Boston, right? And so there's this fantastic history of making great places and beautiful, mixed-use places. And they said, let's do something like that and transform it, because the strip mall was struggling. And so this is what it looks like now. And you just go like, what? How? And and you may go like, oh, that's not for us, right? Or even this isn't for you, right? I'm just showing you examples, right? So you may say that's too urban for us, or architecturally that doesn't feel like here, or whatever. So as I show you these things, these aren't proposals. I'm just giving you examples, so your mind starts to open of like, oh, because so many times when we're talking about stuff as planners, people are like, I didn't even know that was a thing. I didn't know you could redevelop a strip mall and make a cool place, whatever. This is a kind of a neat one. This is a streetscape improvement that somebody did here. They had a really, really wide main street, and they transformed it. And you go like, well, what about all the traffic? And it's so funny because it's still function, and actually in places where they do this kind of thing, the revenue goes up in these places, and because what's happening is people find another way, right? You get that friction, and they start to actually change their habits instead of continuing all to pile down Main Street. Because when somebody's whizzing down a 5-lane Main Street, they're going at a speed where they're not like, oh, I need to go grab something at that little place right there. Unless they're stuck in traffic there, then they may go like, oh, I'll come back next time and stop there. And but when they're sort of going through at a slow, leisurely pace, and it's kind of a beautiful place, oh, you know what? Franklin, like I showed you all before, they built this new ring road around Franklin, and it makes where you don't have to go through downtown Franklin anymore. I still drive through Main Street, just because it's beautiful. It takes me a little bit longer, but it's worth it, because it just enhances my enjoyment of the place. So we're wrapping it up, and I'm going to quit talking. I apologize. It's a lot of slides, but there's a lot of things to think about. So we need to focus on a code that works for Loganville. So it works for the citizens, it's all of you and everybody who's not here, who's hopefully at home and online and all that, and it needs to work for the businesses. Usually when you start thinking in these kind of terms, business, they love it. They're nervous about it at first. Like imagine that streetscape transformation I showed you. They're like, you're going to put us out of business. All these cars are driving by right now. I'm like, yeah, they're driving by. They're not stopping, right? And so we need to make sure we're thinking about the businesses. We need to make sure it's working for the elected and appointed officials, because they've got to answer to all of you, and so we need to do that. We need to think about people at all stages of life. People are living longer than ever before, and people are starting to kind of get away from this sea turtle mentality where you lay your eggs on the beach and then they swim out to sea, and then the babies just fend for themselves. People are starting to want to have that idea of having multi-generational living, maybe not in the same house necessarily, but in the same city, maybe even the same neighborhood, maybe even the same street. So my parents moved up. So I grew up in Birmingham, not England, in Alabama. And they moved up to Franklin, and they live about 5 blocks away. And it's great, date nights and all that kind of stuff. And they lived with us for a little while, and their house is built now. Yay. We're all better for it. And it works for visitors, right? So you already have people who want to visit here, which is great. You have some cool events and different things that go on. You'll have some great open spaces and parks and things, and you've done a really good job of being attractive. This one, sometimes we get boo and hisses and stuff. It needs to work for the development community, because what we forget is that the places in cities and towns that people love the most were built by people for development, for economic benefit. They just used to do it in a really awesome way, in a way that it's hard to deny. Like, okay, there used to be a great farm there, or there was that big oak tree there, or whatever, but dang, now we got the opera house or the whatever, like the people used to get excited when new people moved to town, because that meant that they could actually then maybe they could get a library, they could get a running water, they could get whatever. And we're sort of so far beyond that now new people are just a nuisance, but the development community, they are what builds the future of your city. And a lot of times when we are starting to dream and envision on things, people say, well, who's going to pay for that? Who's going to pay for that? And you say, what? Well, there's two ways you can do it. You can pay for it as a city, or you can have it be part of developments that come through. Now, that said, in so many communities where people struggle and they don't like development, part of the reason they don't like development is because their standards aren't high enough, right? They go, well, I don't like the development because they cut down all the trees. Okay. They don't do that everywhere, do they? No. A lot of cities don't let you do that. Most cities don't let you do that. But a lot of places we work, that's the standard practice. You go clear cut the whole property, and it's got to be some kind of development for people to get excited about that, right? They go like, oh, they don't even have sidewalks, or they have sidewalks on one side of the street, and then they're like, oh, well, it's 102 degrees out here in summer, and I've got a sidewalk, but there's no street trees. In the downtown areas and our most beloved neighborhoods and all the towns and cities that I ever visit, they've got these beautiful trees. Well, they can never have them because they've got a 1-foot grass strip between the sidewalk and the road. That's just grass. Somebody's got you can't even cut it with a lawnmower. You got to use a weed whacker, but most importantly, whatever we do has to represent the essence of Loganville. That's where you all come into play, to make sure, because we're outsiders, right? We know how to do this and all that, but we will never know this place the way that you all do. We deputize you all to be part of the team, and y'all are like the vibe check, the character check, to, hey, yeah, this feels right. I understand what this means. The things that you've talked about or you've shown us, or how you've explained this, is how we want to head in the future. And so we need you all to do that. Now, what's the population of Loganville? 16,000. We need a bigger room, right? Because we want everybody to participate, right? It's not realistic, of course, to have everybody participate, and the thing that's nice is people sometimes get nervous, like, oh, you didn't have enough people show up, so the process wasn't valid. Well, what I found I started my firm 20 years ago, and if you get 10 people to show up who didn't all carpool and ride together, you say, what do you want? Individually, and by about the third person, they're going, well, I don't want to repeat everything they said, but basically what they said. And then every now and then the fifth person will have a new idea that nobody else said, and then they go the next person, and a couple of new ideas come up. But after about the third one, it's people want what people want in general. They're not all that different. It's hard to believe, but I do like it when more people come. Just because there's just excitement about it, and people. It's a zoning ordinance update. It's asking a lot. What made y'all want to come tonight, right? That's like the least sexy thing in planning that we do, is zoning ordinance updates. But whatever it was, share that with people. Tell your friends and family, and you can carpool, So timeline, next steps. We are here at the public kickoff. So we're working on our preparation and analysis, trying to do our homework to get ready for the Codapalooza that's coming up the 23rd through the 26th. And so during that time, we'll come, and I'll tell you more about that in a second. But so then after the Codapalooza, we get a bunch of great input from the masses of people who will come participate. We'll start working on drafting, doing the first draft of the ordinance. We'll create what we call a client draft or staff draft. And so we'll give it to the staff to have them read it first to make sure we haven't like left something on the cutting room floor that was, they're like, wait a minute, didn't you hear everybody? Oh yeah, you know, and so that they'll kind of give us some comments. Then we'll create the public draft, and that will be released to everybody, and you all get to read it, and you'll have a public draft review period, and that's the time when you can take my advice or not at the beginning, and so like say, where's the section about this thing, and you just do that, you know, focus on that thing, or you may go like, I felt heard through the process. I actually don't feel like I'm going to read it, or I'm going to read every word of it. You know, so that's the time when you would do that, and then you give comments back to the staff, and then they kind of go through. They give us edits to make, and then we start working on the preparation of the final ordinance, and then that goes through the adoption process. So all the stuff that we're doing now, all the public input and all the things is like bonus. Because the way that people used to do planning and zoning was they would say, hey, we need to update the zoning ordinance or the comprehensive plan, and they would just go off in the office down the hall and update it, and then they would show up at a hearing, and maybe you saw a notice about it, and you would come and comment, and you'd have your 2 minutes or however long y'all get here, and that was it. And so all this stuff that we're doing and giving opportunities for input is sort of extra before you start the official adoption process. And then you'll have the time where you get to go up to a podium and have a timer on you and all that stuff. So yeah, Codapalooza. So it's a funny name. We just are desperate to make it sound exciting, which is the zoning code. But it will be. It's a time where we'll actually come and set up our office and work remotely from here for those 3 days that I mentioned. And the whole process is open to the public. We'll have a kickoff presentation. We'll talk about some of the stuff that we've talked about tonight, but new stuff too, so don't miss it. And then we'll have a sort of a hands-on exercise where you're going to be planners for the night and start to help us identify where those locations are that you want to protect or transform or whatever. And then we have a series of different technical meetings that will come up the next few days, and different topics. And those are a bit more sort of round table, more intimate discussions. Anyone's welcome to come. So sometimes they get to be a big crowd, but and then we'll actually be working on some kind of planning concepts and things, and even some renderings. So you'll be able to see like, oh yeah, that feels about right, or oh, that seems like I was talking about before, that seems too urban, that doesn't feel like Loganville, or it does, So you can give us feedback on more than just abstract setback numbers and building heights and things, So, and then we'll have a closing presentation. We'll present it all to everybody. Here's the work that we've done, and it's usually a lot of work, you'll be surprised. And then we'll do what we're about to do and do a Q&A, and people just ask questions and talk about stuff until they're tired of hearing me answer their questions. So if you haven't yet, go to www.buildbetterloganville.com. It should be up tomorrow. So you haven't yet. So tomorrow you can. And we need you to spread the word. Y'all are now deputies of the process here. So let's chat. Hopes, dreams, fears, aspirations, concerns. We've got a microphone that's going to be run up to you so that we can capture this for the people in the viewing audience at home. And yeah, what do you think? Is anybody excited? Anybody freaking out? We got one in the front here. Yeah. Oh, and by the way, I'm very bad at noticing and remembering who raised their hand, so thank you. Perfect. All right.
It's a chicken and egg question.
The chicken.
We have a comprehensive plan today.
Yeah.
But we will learn a lot through this process. So should our expectation be that we'll have a new comprehensive plan?
Yeah, sometimes people do update the comprehensive plan after kind of going through a process. I can't remember, what's the date?
They're finalizing it next year.
There you go.
Okay.
Perfect. So that's great. You can sync them up nicely, and then you don't have any of these conflicts. Thanks. Yes, sir.
My name is Lee Phillips. I have a very unique position in Loganville, my mother and I, because we live in the only historic property in Loganville.
Oh, wow.
It is a Walton County historic landmark. My concern is not for our property because it's protected. My concern is for all the other citizens of Loganville. Change is going to happen. Now, he used a very good, he is the best speaker for this job, I'm telling you. He did a very good job on putting forth a comprehensive speech that is very enticing. It's like eating a very sweet cake. It is so good to the mouth.
He's
but
heading for a
remember
snake oil
this.
salesman, I hear it.
Remember this when it hits the belly. Change is coming. For all these changes to occur, it takes one thing, and that's property. Loganville is a town of residents. So to have the property, the residents have to go if you're going to develop the town in any of these ideas. It takes property. There's no large properties in the downtown. I can speak just for the downtown. There's no large properties to do any of these developments in these ways where you have multiple streets and all the buildings and the changing the 5-lane Main Street to smaller lanes with the partition in the middle. All that's real good, but our town is unique because it is not like Conyers, Snellville, Lawrenceville, Winder. We don't have the square footage infrastructure that all these other towns have. That's why our building of our town has to be unique. Now, what the people that own the properties in town have to understand, when change comes and the redistricting and rezoning and all these things occur, they occur for one purpose: to gain the property to do the building. Now, I've been in construction all my life. I started when I was 10 years old. I've got a lot of knowledge in wood frame construction and commercial construction, having worked in the steel industry. So I just want all the citizens to know that with change comes sacrifice, and the sacrifice to the downtown is going to be that those private residences are going to have to give up their property one way or the other, whether they're zoned out, whether they are regulated out. It's all done now to set the standards for later.
Okay.
And so this is what people need to understand. If you're comfortable with living in downtown and you want things to stay the same, it's not going to happen, because the properties will eventually be taken and developed by the developers one way or another.
Yeah, no, those are fair points. So first and foremost, if you see anything that we do that's going to require somebody to have to do something with their property or to lose their property in some way, you'll need to raise your hand and say, don't do that, because that isn't the way that we go about it. What I would imagine is, and to your point, I showed you the 3 examples. There was that cottage court, there was the strip mall redevelopment, and then there was that streetscape improvement. I imagine that you all would be more like the cottage court kind of a thing, right? And so, actually, let me pull that back up. It's kind of interesting. So on that cottage court, what you'll notice is there was a house, an existing house there, right? And so let's just say somebody lives in that house, right? And so, and the house on the front corner, that brick one there. So the brick one went away, but the one in the back didn't. And the reason that we showed this in this way was that the brick one in the front was a newer addition, had been built at some point, sort of didn't fit with the historical character of that area. And But the other one was sort of this contributing sort of, historic architecture, and it's kind of set back and kind of capped off that open space. So what you'll see is probably more of this kind of stuff, but also a lot of times what we're seeing is to your point, there's not like a big open field, grassy area that maybe a new development is going to happen. And that's why what we've been hearing about is the desire for some of these suburban retrofits on the strip highways or in parking lots or those kind of things. But ultimately, nothing that we're going to do is going to require somebody to do something they don't want to do. So you use the term they're going to lose their property or whatever. At best, they would sell their property, right? And so they would decide on a price for it or whatever. Even if the zoning on a single-family home changed to mixed use or something like that, like so, for instance, that little house, the little cottage there, if that became a mixed-use zoning designation that happened to also allow for a cottage court, the person who lived there can continue to live there. So there's all grandfathering provisions that'll be in there. I'm sure you all currently have them in your ordinance right now. Those will persist, and so we'll address all these things, but it's not something to just gloss over or take lightly. It's a fair point. And so, if it's something that you're concerned about, just kind of follow along this process and raise your hand anytime you see that you think that we're kind of stepping over that boundary. Yes.
I like your presentation. It's real good. I do have some concerns in some certain areas because I don't think we're capable for road diets like your Main Street scene shown. And I do work in Decatur and Tucker where they're choked themselves like that. And talking with homeowners that live in those areas, they've said it's made it difficult for them to actually do business, to go into town and do stuff. These are the people that I service. But my big question to you is, are you going to be dealing with the entire city of Loganville from boundary to boundary? Because when Sizemore came in, it was targeted and it was only dealt with like Main Street, and that's why we got the library. And that was sort of their mission. And so that was something I didn't pick up on y'all's last presentation at City Council. Because basically, from what I've heard over the years, the 78's been left to just grow however it grows. And you're here saying, well, we want to control that growth. We want it to be targeted growth and to enhance the Loganville. But if you're only going to focus on these 6 blocks, then you're not doing anything any different than Sizemore did.
Yeah.
But then that's the question I want to know. Are you doing the whole town, or are you just doing one little spot?
Yes. So I'll answer it in 2 different ways. So we're doing the whole ordinance, which is the whole town. But when it comes to thinking about like specific things that it's doing, besides just the cleaning up and the inconsistencies and all of that stuff, those will be targeted, but not just for the 6 blocks as you're referring to it. So, but you guys, as we go through the Codapalooza process, will start to direct us to like that cottage core. I mean, that's a very small piece of property, but they're like, oh, this would be a great spot for something to happen. And we didn't even, that's not a zoning proposal. That was literally us illustrating, because people were like, oh, wouldn't it be great if we could have some of these tiny houses and have some cottage courts, and people had heard of that. And so we were showing them what they could do on a parcel that people said, oh, this is a parcel that should have something happen. It was right next to our Main Street. It could have just as well been developed, as if Main Street turned the corner and they could have done something, where somebody lived above a shop or whatever. So it's not a proposal. It's intended to be, like I said, protective and transformative in the areas that y'all want to transform. But we don't have a directive. We've not been given like, oh, go do this, go do that, except for clean it up and help us figure out how to make improvements where we want to make improvements. So.
Thank you, Ryan. So, look, you had an example up there, probably back before that, the little cottage town scenario, but you were showing, I guess, a visual of the zoning ordinance. Is that what I took that as? It had like a picture of of a section and then a table that
Yes.
explain what it is.
Yeah.
So is that kind of the vision for our rewrite, to have this tool that have our zoning ordinance so that we can pick it up as council members, as residents, as developers, and understand wholly what we're doing here?
Yeah, so yes, sort of, but we're trying not to blow everybody's mind, right? Because there's always a learning curve, and kind of to your point too, of like, is it citywide and all of these things, like in the areas where you're not wanting things to change, which is a good bit, right? I mean, unless y'all are different than every other place we've worked, right? In those areas, changing the way it's set up and everything just for change's sake can cause, challenges for that learning. It makes that learning curve bigger. So certainly in the areas where we might do a new protective character-based district for the historic downtown area, or for an area you want to transform, those will definitely be set up and sort of in this kind of easier to use format. Yeah, so that's kind of how we're doing it now. It's targeted, so yes.
I'm a little confused. And I'm not usually, I feel like some of this conversation is coming out as you're going to develop our downtown and how we want it to look. And am I correct in assuming that you're going to rewrite our zoning laws and our zoning ordinances, and what our city council decides to do with that is how our city is going to look? Correct?
Yeah, correct in.
Okay, because I see the pictures on there, and it's, this is what we did with that, and this is what we did with this.
Yes.
And so I'm getting the feeling that the public is going to think you're going to come in and you're going to design that.
No,
little
no, no.
pocket park and that kind of thing. And I
Yeah.
just want to reiterate, I guess, that we are rewriting our zoning laws and our ordinances for our city council to decide what's going to be put on that piece of property.
Yes,
And-
yeah, well, sort of. Like, I mean, yes, but does the city council want to tell that property owner that they must do that cottage
No,
court?
we want
Or
to tell the developer, this is what we want on that piece of property.
yes, that's what, yeah. So, yes.
So our main goal is to rewrite the zoning laws and ordinances to get what we want our city to look like.
Correct.
And that's what we're paying you for.
Absolutely, yes. First and foremost. So I'm glad you asked that. And I always hesitate showing examples of things at this point in the process because it sometimes can lead to confusion. And so like I said, when I was showing it, the reason that I showed you that was just to expand your thinking, not about that specific thing for here, but to go like, oh, when he says transform something, he doesn't just mean, oh, well, now it has to have brick on it. Whereas in the old ordinance, they could do vinyl siding. And now we've really transformed things because we make them do brick, So that was kind of what I meant by that. So thank you for asking me that. So, who else? Yep.
One more comment about the airplane analogy.
Okay.
Here's why the airplane analogy is important. Because yes, we are all passengers on the plane. We can talk to the stewardess and tell the stewardess our concerns about the flight, but the flight plan has already been designated. The pilot has the flight plan, and the control tower is going to direct the pilot when to leave and take off. So yes, we're passengers, but just remember,
But, so here's the difference, right? And that's the fun. I love these analogies. So, especially when working off my original analogy. So, the difference is, this is your pilot speaking. Where do you want to go? Right? That's what we're doing through this process, is y'all are telling us where you want to go. And we're going, okay, we got it. Now we're going to go fly you there, right? It's sometimes surprising to people when we show up for the first time and they go like, literally people sometimes will say like, well, what are you going to do with the, there's always a dead mall. What are you going to do with the dead mall? What's your plan for, I'm like, oh, you have a dead mall? Good to know. right? And it's like surprising for a consultant to come to and invite you at the very beginning of the process. And it nearly seems like too good to be true. There's like some suspicion to it, you know? And a minute ago when you were talking, that's what I said. He's about to call me a snake oil salesman, because I've literally we were in Chestertown, Maryland, in the local newspaper. They love to get people stirred up, and they's like, and he did this presentation, and it was just like a snake oil salesman. And I'm like, but it's not normal, I think, for people to be asked what they want, you know, in planning. And you should see when I do this for a development project, because we do the same process. We before we put pen to paper, we bring the public in and say, let's go through this process together. What do you want to see? And they're like, wait a minute, what's the catch? You've got the plan in your back pocket, I know. And they're like frisking me. And I'm like, we really don't. That's why we do set up our office here, so you can watch. Right before your eyes, you're going to see, we're making the first mark on the paper. Take note, you know. And so I know it's a little unusual, but bear with us and sort of come along as we go. So a couple more.
Hi.
Hi.
I've been here since '96, and when I moved here, they were just finishing up the public shopping center. So I have seen a lot of changes. I love Loganville. Don't plan on going anyplace else. Still in the city limits. Plan to stay in the city limits. But what I have learned, being on city council for 8 years, that people that don't want change don't want to have an open mind, because they are afraid it's going to go against what they want.
Yeah.
So it's all about them, not about the 16,000 people that live in Loganville. And I have found that through all this process, the people that holler the loudest and scream the loudest are the ones that are paid attention to. The rest of us that want to see change and want to think that we've got a chance of making downtown Loganville a better place to live, they're the ones that never say anything. So for me, and this is for me personally, if you want to see Loganville change and you want it to be a place that you're going to be proud of, happy with, want to live here, want to bring your friends here, then you need to speak up and not sit in your seat with your mouth shut because you think everybody else is going to say bad things about you, and that's okay. I've had lots of bad things said about me, and that's okay. Yeah. You know, when I ran for election, I knew what I was getting myself into. But I'm just telling the people here and that listening on YouTube, if you don't want this city controlled by a handful of people that scream the loudest, then you need to be here. You need to come to the next meeting we have. You need to see what's going on, and don't have a closed mind. I mean, this could be a great city. And I just think that people need to have an open mind, and I'm just telling everybody here, give them a chance. Let them come forward. Let them put out what's out there. They're not going to condemn anybody's property. They're not going to take over the town. They're not going to be another Conley. So give them a chance. That's all I'm saying. And if you like it, you do it. If you don't, that's okay too.
Thank you. The good news is that everything you just described is normal. It's just human nature. It happens every place we go, and that's okay. But what it also means is that I have to have like spidey senses and radar for what the overall sentiment actually is. What I found is there's a quote by an author. He said, "Good is the enemy of great," right? And so if this place is good, you're like, I'm just going to go about my business. I'm busy. I got all this stuff to do and all that. And the other thing that we find too is that normally you don't have like young families and people just out of college at these things because they often are in the busiest stages of their life, and we have people who are retired or whatever. And so what I've started doing, and it seems to resonate, is kind of to your point, like you look around the room and say, who's not here? And you go, okay, well, my child's not here, my grandkids aren't here, my friend's not here, whatever. And then tell me what you think that they would like to see, you know? Because so often, like when we're doing things like zoning and comprehensive plans, these are long-term endeavors, right? I heard somebody, we were doing something last week, and she said, I'm not gonna be here very long. This is about my kids or my grandkids, you know? And I was like, that's a great point, you know? And so when you think about these things, you go, you know, sometimes you go, I don't know what my kids are thinking or my grandkids are thinking. Well, you do, it seems weird to you maybe, but you do know what they're thinking. And so share that too. So like, they're not here, but, or even call them. Like go home and call them, be like, hey, what would make you move back? Because a lot of times that's what it is. They left, you know? And if there's not some sort of a passion reason for it or whatever, they're not here. And so you got to call them and ask them, what would make you move back? So it's good points. Yes, sir.
Yeah, maybe changing the subject just a little bit.
Totally fine.
We're from a subdivision that's outside the city, and I've been here since 1996 too, and don't want to hear what nobody wants to do in the city. I mean, just mark the land. If they don't want to sell it, just don't sell it. Just develop what can be developed in the city, if that's the route that we go. But the other thing is, it just came up whenever we were having a candidates meeting at our clubhouse, and a lot of the citizens was excited in our neighborhood that we started talking about changing some of the traffic patterns by just connecting some of the businesses, having more walkable things that we can do. Mm-hmm. Please, let's don't get in one of those things that it's just going to everybody can get in different corners and complain about what we can't do. So I'm talking, there's from the 16,000 people that live outside the city, because everybody doesn't live in the city. We really don't care. Just move us forward and in the places we can move forward in. And that's updating some of our codes, where we're trying to find out how we can have our neighborhood when 50 LLCs buy the property up, and we're trying to work to find out who them LLCs are for us to be able to talk with them about some of the ordinances that we can't control. And I understand that's citywide. Yeah. So I think we can work together to make it a healthier place, other than to spend all of our time on what we're going to do on them 4 or 5 blocks there to the city. So that's my goal.
Yeah, good. Yeah, and while we're looking for the next mic, oh, he got it. I'll say one thing and then throw it back to you. My encouragement to you all will be also that because you don't often update your ordinances in this way, more than just a random fix this chicken issue and that bagel issue there, you're like, oh my gosh, this has to be absolutely perfect the moment we adopt it, or else. What I would say to you is, most places we go are way worse off in the limbo, waiting, going through some lengthy adoption process. In the meantime, development applications are coming through, all that stuff. Give yourself a break and just be like, okay, we're going to adopt it once we, do your due diligence, of course. And then we're going to come back and we're going to do a cleanup in 12 months or whatever. And sort of anything that you didn't catch or anything you go like, oh, that didn't actually turn out exactly how we hoped or whatever. Just do that, because we were working in one community and I was like, tell me about your last ordinance update. And they're like, ugh. And I was like, what in the world? Like, well, it took 4 years and there was a whole like scandal and all this stuff happened. And I'm like, whoa. It's not that hard to update a zoning ordinance. And so sometimes though, you just get that anxiety, like I was saying about like, this is our only chance, but it's not. So, yes.
Okay. She was very much right on point with what she said about people want change, and there's some that may not want change. There's you'll find that there's a third rail in the town, and if you want to watch this city council sweat it out and watch tornadoes sit in here, bring up the words RM4 and RM44, and that's high-density development that a lot of people in the town will show up, they'll fill this room up, and they'll stand against it. But they're not against smart growth that's compatible with the town with respect to the structure that we have within the city. So I don't think there's people that are closed-minded about the town's growth. I think there are those that let's do a stack and pack, and then there are those that says, can't we do something along the lines of an Avondale or a Decatur, where it's not in some of the areas where it's more low scale, where you do reasonable infill like you're saying. But as you explore our city, you'll find that the people that seem to be dead set against change, they want growth, but they don't want to be run over.
Yeah.
And I think that's the difference.
Yeah, that's great points. And I'll give y'all some homework too. Before we come back for the Codapalooza, if y'all will, go look for some of those examples that you think are suitable, acceptable, that, even if they're in even if it's in a town that y'all compete with. We see lots of places, well, I don't want to be so-and-so, and that so-and-so is like usually really awesome. But I get it, you want to be you. And so, but tell us about some of those places, and then that's really helpful for us. So thanks for that. Yes?
Just an easy question. The story you told about the 4 years to do the code. When you walk away, are you going to set us up with like best practices to maintain it, so we don't fall back into this trap where they don't, where they get all messy and you got to do a lot of cleanup and all that fun stuff?
Yeah. So one of the things that we like to do is to build local capacity, and so sort of some places where they don't actually have a planner or whatever, and so it's difficult, but you guys do. And so sort of having him come along with us. And what we really like to do is kind of down the road even, we start to be less and less involved in presentations and all that stuff, because if we're the only ones the night you adopt it that knows it, and like some places we go, the staff is just like, no, you guys are the experts, and our elected officials are sometimes mean to me if I don't, whatever, and so they like us to take the darts and the grenades, and so we, I'm sure that doesn't happen here. He hasn't said that to me, but nonetheless, that's part of our strategy, is making it where, it's more like, hey, we get a call, like Robbie's like, hey, there was this thing I was wondering about. What do you think? How, it's like, oh yeah, that's good. Okay, so.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Yes.
Just a question for the city and the council. Is it intended that all of these meetings will be public?
Yes.
It is. And then how do you filter through all the comments to get down to the nuts and bolts of what we're looking for versus just the complaints?
Yeah.
Because if you have a Facebook group,
Yeah.
I would say you need to, keep it as your community, either business owners in the city or, homeowners in the city, and not it to be on anyone who just happens to drive through the city, because those that live here don't experience the same thing as people going from Conyers to Winder.
Yeah.
And my only other comment is for those on the council and the city and the employees. And the Facebook comments you guys have to endure from the public. My whole philosophy, even with my kids, is, unless you're willing to get in there and do something about it, or to run or to represent, then you really just need to sit back and be quiet. Yeah. It's easy to complain on Facebook.
Yeah. Well, and for what it's worth, like all of the people who are online personalities and podcasters and all that, the ones that are the sort of healthiest, and who are the most successful, say, never read the comments, right? And just don't read the comments, And it's hard, though. It's like, especially in a small town, and, it's like, you want to see, what do people think about this? And then you go, like, oh, I can't believe they said that, And so it's just, human nature. But I think that these are all great points. And part of the thing that's kind of neat about our process is that we actually not subtle about it because I'm about to say it now, but normally it's more subtle, is that we're helping people learn how to be like citizens again and like neighbors and participants. And like we'll have people who come in and, you know, at the end of the Codapalooza and they're like at a table with somebody and they're like, oh, everybody sort of introduce themselves, what street do you live on, whatever. And they're like, no way, I live right down there. They live like 4 doors down from each other. They didn't even know each other, and now they realize, and now they're friends, and they, you know, whatever. So all of these things are troubling and frustrating sometimes and all that. But again, I just want to encourage you all that they're normal. It's not just a Loganville thing. And by the way, can y'all tell me how you say Loganville or Loganville? Ville. Okay, got it. You never know. It's like that Chestertown, Maryland I mentioned earlier. I walked into there and I was opening night and I'm like, hey, it's so good to be here in Chesterton. Da, da, da. And I asked somebody before I went in, how do you say it? And he was from Maryland. And so I said Chesterton 3 or 4 times. And then somebody in the back's like, excuse me, you're in Chestertown. I don't know if you know it or not. I was like, and that's why we have all of you here to help us. So, but who else? Who's got the mic? Brian, do you have any questions?
No.
Okay. Well, this is awesome. Thank you all so much. I appreciate it. This will be a journey as we'll all kind of do this together, and all of the sort of positive, sort of like keeping an open mind and kind of keeping this a positive process will serve you well, because you wouldn't believe how many places that we work where decisions are made at the city level by staff and by elected officials and all of that, and oftentimes by staff, because staff is like, you know, you go, oh, that staff, or I'm going to complain. This is like their job, right? And like, there's not that many places to go be the engineer, right? And so it's like all of a sudden, I don't know if y'all have an engineer, but engineer's here, so I just made that up. But I'm saying like, and so it's a big deal for them. So we'll hear people say like, hey, why are you not letting us do this really cool thing on this development project? And they're like, well, we really like it, but if we do, you know how many complaints we're going to get? And I'm like, who's going to complain? People call. And I'm like, okay. But there's all the other people who love it, who didn't take the time to call. And so you just have a complaints department or a complaints box, or you ask one of your retired, you know, 5-star generals in town to answer that phone line and be like, complaints department, you know, and, you know, whatever. So I encourage you to not kind of do that, because it makes it where ultimately everything gets watered down, everything becomes vanilla, all of that stuff, and that's okay too. Maybe this is a place like Brian Hudson's favorite ice cream flavor is vanilla, believe it or not, just vanilla. So not even like French vanilla, Tahitian vanilla with the little beans in it or whatever, but so vanilla is okay if that's what you want, but if you want something else too, don't let yourselves kind of paint yourselves in a corner. So y'all all go enjoy dinner.